go. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I get to have you after lunch, so we'll see how it works. Just waiting a few more minutes for anybody who's going to be coming in. But just very quickly, for those of you who might not already know me, my name is Wendy Atieno. I work within the climate change team, working with Ali, with Catherine, with Greg. And my role is working on ecosystem-based adaptation, or nature-based solutions for adaptation. My most recent hat is as a fund manager for the Global EbA Fund. But broadly speaking, within the climate change team, I see my role as linking action on ground and global policy. So working with my colleagues who are directly working on these policy processes, and also working with my colleagues in IUCN country offices who are implementing the work and being the link between those two pieces. During lunch, I had someone who asked me, I know you're from the Global EbA Fund, what are you doing here? And I would say FEBA was developed before the fund and very much has that ethos of then linking action on the ground to global policy. So in that way, that is why I'm here, for the learning and to see what are the lessons that we're learning and how are those lessons feeding into the various different processes. All right, the room looks full, perfect. So we're gonna move into our breakout sessions, hopefully to kind of get us moving after lunch. And the purpose of this is, of course, as we've absorbed a lot of information for the previous part of the day, to now try and apply that information. And so each of these sessions that we're going to go into, which have not been displayed yet, intentionally, is looking to address a specific challenge or opportunity related to scaling EbA. So again, going back to the EbA Fund, it is about scaling effective implementation of EbA. What is one question or something that you need before you get into implementation? So taking a step back and thinking about what are your gaps? Gaps in data and science, gaps in knowledge, policy, whatever it is, financing, capacity building, and looking at what can you do to address those gaps. So that's what the breakout sessions are going to be about. And it's looking at offering practical tools, best practices, and a platform for collaborative problem solving. All right. So we'll break out into groups, and the participants then will be engaging with experts. So we'll have some of our speakers today as the facilitators of these breakout groups, and it will be focused particularly on the area of expertise. And the goal is to bring everything from today and beyond, right? The experience that you bring here, the questions that you came with, the answers that you have, to bring all of that together so that when we leave here, we have actionable, and I'm emphasizing actionable, next steps. So my question earlier about how do you do the capacity building is really speaking to that. We talk a lot of jargon, we have a lot of terminology, but really breaking into, if I'm going to give you a recipe, can you follow that recipe? So that's really the question to prime you for the breakout groups. All right. Maybe an example of some of the work that has come out of these discussions through other roles that I've had at IUCN. We had a urban EbA working group on FEBA in the FEBA network, and that came simply from a question, an email that came to us about examples of urban EbA in the Global South. There were examples in the Global North, there were examples plenty in China, but not so much in other areas of the Global South. That led to then the working group developing a survey to get case studies and examples, and led to a publication. So just some inspiration for what could come out of here today. Another example then is discussions on One Health, where through different groups bringing together practitioners and policymakers in One Health and adaptation, that then resulted in conversations that involved donors that has unlocked funding specifically for One Health. And for that, then I would like to shout out Iki for being part of that process of linking One Health and nature for adaptation. And so now, with all of that preamble, we have our 4 breakout groups. Catherine? Thank you. So group 1 is on implementing inclusive EbA that work for biodiversity and climate. So the group is facilitated by Tristan Terrell from CBD and Jeffrey Chi from ISD. Do we have Jeffrey? Hi. All right. So group 1 we'll go around and just by a show of hands then assign people. So you could do this based on interest, based on expertise, based on questions that you have. It's up to you. Second group is on unlocking private sector investment in EBA. So for all the questions about financing, what are the opportunities and challenges for approaching this? And we have Anna, who's facilitating that. Thank you. Then our third group is bridging the gap from policy to practice in EBA. That is being led by Rohini. All right. Do we know if she's here?
I can check, and another option could be that we merge one of the groups, or two of the groups rather.
Okay. And we'll assess based on interest.
Yes, exactly.
All right. And then you have group 4 on monitoring and evaluating EBA. So we had the presentation earlier that was about you cannot measure without good indicators. So how do we get to those good indicators? So this will be led by Yvonne. Thank you. And Astrid. She's over here. All right. Good. All right. So by show of hands, how many people would like to be in group 1? So this is biodiversity and climate in EBA. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Do I have a pen with me? There we go. So we have 6 for the first group. And for group 2, unlocking private sector investment in EBA, we have a very confident hand up. Nice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then bridging the gap from policy to practice in EBA. What do you think? We could still have a discussion. We could still have actionable. But then we'd also need a facilitator for this group. So who would like to volunteer? So bridging the gap from policy to practice in EBA.
But otherwise I can go to David because number 4 is also interesting. So however, if you want to do a 3, I can try.
So maybe let me ask then how many people are interested, and then we can see about the logistics of it. So group number 3, how many people were interested or are interested? We have 2, 3. Okay, good. Let's see what we're going to do about that logistically. All right, and then last but not least, we have monitoring and evaluating EBA, measuring impact and demonstrating value. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9. Who doesn't know where they would like to go? Who's very multifaceted, multi-interested, who's like, I don't know where I want to go. So we have 2. So we have 2 people who, sorry, remind me your name? Valeska. And where are you coming from, Valeska?
Actually, I'm coming from Essen. I'm working in food.
Okay.
I'm a teacher, so we're trying to build climate projects in Alpes because of the study we had like 13 years ago within tiny foresting that's also picking up in biodiversity, and the rest is at school actually. Little projects for the school and implementing biodiversity projects for the school ground.
Okay. I have lots of conversations I would like to have with you, but trying to think about where would you fit? I think policy to practice, potentially, because then you're talking about the policy, the practice component of that. And Val, what about you?
Val was supposed to be in all 4 groups, but I didn't have my hand up for monitoring evaluation. So.
Okay. All right. So we have 2 breakout rooms already selected, and the biggest groups are going to move to that, and then we'll have the 2 smallest groups in here. So for our folks who are bridging the gap from policy to practice, we can have you start here. It's a small group, so it might be done much faster, and then you will have the opportunity then to go to a different group. So we have total, Greg, remind me, 90 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. So we have until 3:50. Yeah. We have until 3:50, which is a coffee break, to go into your breakout groups. There will be questions that have been provided, which I'll also mention here. And then you will be able to discuss those. Again, remember, come back with actionable items, right? What can we do when we leave here. Of course, there's lots of ways to take this forward. So it's not just like IUCN and FEBA taking this forward, but what can you also do within your existing context for your organizations, for the different networks that you're part of? What are recommendations that we can give other people not represented here today also to say, this is what we think you can do? So it's really about that. What can you do? And identifying who's the you in this conversation. All right, so we've already identified the groups. The facilitators, oh yes, we do need a facilitator for the group, which we have. We also would like to have a note taker. Some of us who are part of the organizing team will serve as note takers, but if your group doesn't actually have one, nominate somebody. And what we're working to do today, as I mentioned, is developing practical, actionable EBA recommendations, and then that are focusing on overcoming implementation barriers and scaling up effective strategies to deliver to COP30. So we're also thinking about ahead of COP30, and then identifying collaborative solutions for COP30 and building partnerships and identifying innovative financing to strengthen EBA, and then of course targeting specific EBA challenges. So what are the key issues that we're looking at, for example, with monitoring, evaluation, and financing? So again, you have until 3:50. I will come around just to let you know that the time is over. If you'd like to continue into the coffee break or bring your coffee in here, you're welcome to. But at 4:15, we need to be back here. All right? Great. Thank you, everyone. 50. Yes. 10 to 4. Yeah. Great. So if I may go back again. So we had a 10-person group, unlocking private sector investment. You will have the farthest room down the hall. And then we had a 9-person group. My notes are all over now. Thank you. Yeah, so the 9-person group, here we go. The 9-person group will go to the second room from the wall, and then our last 2 groups will stay here. Thank you very much, everyone. Would you like to stay from policy to practice? And think about how the work that you're doing with school groups contributes to UNFCCC?
Yeah, actually, I mean, it's like right now, it's like we do more for the local level. Yes. Like planning for like projects. So it's like I'm not really sure that that's like more interested in because it's like we're working actually in the community right now, and then we're working on the whole Bonn level. Yes. Also, there's so much which is
like I said, right? My role is to lead these 2 conversations.
yeah, so it's like I just wanted to ask which one that person that's the monitoring, so I'll stay here, yeah.
Okay. Both of them will be here, and it's bridging gap the policy to practice and the monitoring and evaluation.
Excellent.
You don't need to move. But I was going
No, no, fine with me. It's like, no, I mean, it's like, it's a contact.
oh, sorry, yes.
No, that's,
I'm still here.
yeah. Francesca, hi.
Hi.
Perfect. You're right here. Okay. So I'll let everybody know. All right. All right. Okay. Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back. It's gone louder. This is good. Looks like we have a lot of discussion coming out of the breakout groups. Good. This is great momentum coming out of the breakout groups and after coffee, and the conversation is still going. Wonderful. All right, so welcome back again to plenary. We will have maybe like 2 to 3 minutes for each of the groups to very briefly present specifically on actions. So there was a question about that. So giving you time before we get to that part to think about, what are the key 2 to 3 actions that came out from the discussion sessions. But I wanted to welcome you all back to plenary, and then we're going to wrap up the breakout groups. So our previous session, we named Accelerating EBA Implementation, Practical Strategies and Collaborative Solutions. Even though this is still part of that session, we have renamed this specifically towards COP30, charting a course for enhanced EBA action. And really the reason, again, is emphasizing action and actionable steps. So throughout the day, through the different sessions, we've heard really powerful, useful insights from high-level perspectives to local innovations on what it can take to scale and sustain EBA. And then in this session, we're working again to bring all of that together, right? To come out of here from the examples we've received through the sessions, from the examples in the discussions in the groups, to come out of here with actions that we can take forward. And we, as a broad community of practice, there are different segments that we all represent. There are some segments that are not represented here, but thinking about what can we take forward, who are we going to engage, who are we going to influence to be able to achieve that. So in the next few minutes, we'd like to have the session leads come to the front of a group and share 2 to 3 actions from the discussions, and particularly those with the potential to influence policy, to spur partnerships, to scale implementation as we lead into COP30. I don't know which group would like to begin. I don't want to pick anyone first. I just want a volunteer of a group to start us with identifying these actions. If not, I will pick. All right, Anna, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, let me take it.
All right. Okay, so I'll do my best. Try to summarize. We had a really, really engaging discussion with the group. Lots of different perspectives, and personally, I learned a lot. So maybe just to highlight that we kind of started with looking at some of the challenges that there are in terms of getting private sector engaged, and then kind of cross-cutting point there was that we really need to better understand the diversity within the private sector, looking at that there are different scales that private sector operates in, and the different actors and the language that we speak when we are engaging with the private sector. And also, what do we actually mean by engaging with the private sector? In terms of the recommendations, so first one would be, and again, considering this diversity within the private sector actors, the discussion was that there is need to create some sort of coordination mechanism or to bring together the existing platforms and coalitions to both in national and global scales and connect them with the EBA initiatives. So again, like trying to some sort of a coordination system. This mechanism could work across government ministries and build on existing platforms. We should not reinvent the wheel, but build on what is already there. And it was mentioned that perhaps IUCN could play a role in this. The second recommendation that emerged from our discussions was in relation to the de-risking of early stage investments, and the blended finance came very strongly on that discussion, working with public-private cooperation, but also through the support from philanthropic institutions. Linked to this was the government's role overall in creating this supportive policy and governance frameworks for this to happen. And national development banks were also mentioned as a key, especially on a national scale. And the third point that we had was in relation to communication and advocacy. So really thinking of how do we speak to the private sector and reframing the narrative around EBA from cost to actually that this is an investment opportunity. There was also ideas, should we develop some sort of a pitch depending on which private sector we're approaching. And then finally, we should not forget the role of consumers because they drive and play a key role in private sector. So really consumers' role in demanding, they can incentivize private sector to invest in EBA. So, just to say that we had a lot of resources and reports were shared. So we captured those and we can share them also with the participants.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. 1 second. I used to be a school teacher, so about to do that. Question that you were not prepared for. When you talk about coordination mechanisms or bringing people together and connecting them with EBA across government ministries, my question is how, right? Because one of the things that we know here is that then you have the person who's responsible for CBD, for UNFCCC as an example, for UNCCD, they sit in the same office. But then any conversation then has to go maybe to central government in a different place before they can have a communication together. So I'm putting you on the spot, but maybe if the group members also have an idea, how do you make those coordination mechanisms effective? How do you make people talk to one another?
Yeah, okay. I'm hoping my group can also chip in, but I think that's where it was kind of highlighted that it should be someone who already has expertise and the connection and links in the EBA community, who could then liaise with the private sector, bring them in, perhaps through a working group or a kickoff meeting, bringing together these coalitions and partnerships that already exist. So really building the bridge from the EBA community to the private sector.
Thank you very much. And at the reception, if you have examples, we're looking for those, so please do share. Thank you so much, Anna. And this was group 4? No, group 2. Thank you so much to group 2. All right, so they went first. Who wants to go next before I start calling on people? Perfect, because you were right next.
Thanks very much, Wendy, and good afternoon, everyone. So this was Group 1, looking at inclusive EBA in the context of climate and biodiversity action. And specifically, we're looking at Section C of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and how those cross-cutting considerations should be elevated up into, in particular, national policy systems and ultimately their implementation. So we had a number of discussions because there are 18 different elements within Section C, and so conversation certainly flowed around a little bit, but some of the common themes, the common elements that really came out in the discussion were around recognizing the diverse values as well as worldviews and understanding about what is nature, what is climate change, how do people see themselves within those The rights of Indigenous people, as well as the human rights-based approach, very important. Gender and gender equality, which is one of the key ones, but intergenerational equity was also mentioned, as was education. Access to finance, we had a long discussion about money, as is always the case. And then national and local circumstances, so recognizing national priorities and circumstances, but then also at the local level, recognizing individuals' local circumstances and how to link vertically between local level realities as well as national priority setting. Synergies, obviously, but cooperation and synergies across the different processes, certainly here within UNFCCC, but also thinking through from the CBD side through to UNCCD as well as other things. And biodiversity and health was a very important one, not least because we were talking also about agri-food systems and links through to malnutrition and other concerns. In terms of the main takeaways and sort of action points, starting with the finance and ensuring access to finance, and the need for funders and donors and those who channel funds to consider those principles and those elements within Section C and use those as the guiding principles for the support that they are providing. Also to think about it in the more holistic sense in terms of, as was mentioned earlier, about sort of funding cycles and things like that, when you're talking about approaches like free, prior and informed consent, they can take time. They right the way through a project. These funders don't necessarily always take those into consideration, but if you're going to do it properly, you need to be thinking long term. Capacity building obviously was very important, and there's obviously a role for the EBA Knowledge Day and the EBA community more broadly in how we're supporting capacity building efforts. There's work under CBD. There's also work under UNFCCC, including youth-led initiatives that were highlighted, and the need for those to work coherently and synergistically together. Sorry, I'm trying to read the notes. Importance of bridging organizations and different stakeholders to support countries in enhancing their inclusivity and HRBA. Thanks, Jeffrey. Maybe I won't read it all word for word until we've had a time to properly distill the notes. But the importance of engaging multiple different perspectives and angles in this process. And I think, Wendy, that kind of links to the question that you asked Anna just before about how to do that. We didn't get to that point, so please don't ask me the same question. But there is a need to have those coordination, consultative mechanisms at various levels as well, whether it's here in the sort of more international community, but certainly at the national level, and then how they drill down to the local level. And also one of the things linked to that was recognizing that while we're talking about groups, like whether it's the private sector or indigenous peoples and local communities or whatever, they're not necessarily homogenous in amongst themselves, and there are differences that also need to be taken into account of. Enhancing synergies, yeah, and slightly repeating here, but synergies both at national and international policy processes, but also going down, so even at a more local level, policies subnationally might themselves also have a siloed approach. And even though sometimes we talk about at the local level, a lot of these things come together, sometimes there are systems where either legal, because of legislation or because of financing restrictions, they themselves are implemented in a more siloed approach. So there needs to be support from even a national or potentially even an international level to identify where those need to be more coherent with each other.
That is for
the very final thing, peer-to-peer learning and how to bring those communities together. And again, that's whether that's EBA National, EBA Knowledge Day and something like this sort of process, but also at the national level, or even through things like the BioBridge initiative under CBD of bringing, okay, one party wants to have experiences from relating to a certain thing. How can they find that, and what are those mechanisms? I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Tristan, and thank you to the group. Still have a question for you, Tristan. I won't ask you about how to break silos, but I will ask you, when you say capacity building in the context that you discussed in the group, who is being targeted with the capacity building, what is the information that you were discussing about building the capacity on, and who are other people that you could bring into part of that process?
Thanks. I'm looking to the other group members to definitely jump in with thoughts on this. But from our side, it was, from my perspective anyway, it was two sides. It was one in terms of the policy people at the national level, those who are either revising or implementing the NBSAP at that sort of higher level, that they have the understanding of some of these approaches and who they need to be engaging with. And so there's a need for the EBA community, for instance, to reach out to those national focal points or whoever the responsible people are, but then also local level capacity building, and that they understand what are the policy instruments that they could be working with, the legal frameworks that they can be working with, and of course the financing and the funding and who they can potentially go and talk to, what sort of systems are in place. So it's multi-scalar. Is that a word?
Thank you very much. Any additional points? All right, great job. Good job. Let's see. Let's go to group 4 on monitoring and evaluating EBA. And for the groups that are coming, if something has been said and shared by the previous group that you would like to build on or add to, you're welcome to. And I will start my timer.
Thank you very much. We're both talking about monitoring and evaluation. We had quite a very interesting group. Also in terms of looking at who is here from the academia, who is more from the practitioner side point of view, and who is policymaker. And I'm going to start with challenges, and then we're going over to solutions. One of the challenges in monitoring and evaluation is that monitoring and evaluation is not part of the EBA implementation. And that's actually a huge challenge, but because it can lead to maladaptation. So we have to think about safeguards. The other challenge is, one that I'm often seeing in the countries that I'm working, is there is no theory of change when they do their national adaptation plans. There's a lack of baseline or a reference, and the goals are not clearly set, so it's really difficult to identify indicators if the objectives are not clear. And there is another challenge, that is that short-term needs and urgencies sometimes compromise long-term visions and strategies. And that's also actually from a donor side I want to mention. Like if I'm doing reforestation in a watershed, it's going to take 10, 15 years until there is less sediment and water quality is enhanced. And I'd like to add another challenge that it's not here, but one challenge that I'm often seeing is coherence within governments and ministries. There is duplication in the role, who is responsible for monitoring and evaluation, little coordination, their function is not clearly described. So this leads to challenges. And now we're going over to solutions.
Okay, thank you so much. It was really a very nice discussion in terms of, so we were always linking everyone's statement in terms of a challenge to directly a solutions. So the idea is now that we try to consolidate a little bit and cluster what could be the key messages on solution or on actions to be taken and to be communicated forward. And the first one is actually that we think it's really important to promote a common vision to ensure coherence in EBA actions across different scales. That means that if a community is planting trees, which is a vision from the ministry, that the vision of the ministry and at national level and the vision of the community at the local level are really not harmonized, and often in cases. And I think this is to have really ownership and to have to ensure a joint achievement of the goals and joint definition of the goals and the benefits. That's kind of what we think in terms of promoting a common vision and to ensure also short-term benefits in relation to this, next to linking this directly to the long-term climate-related benefits for the communities. So we were learning this morning already about incentives, but that this joint visioning is really something which should happen across scales, so both horizontal but also vertical in terms of different sectors, but also vertical between local and national scales. One very important point which we want to emphasize, and we hope this gets further to UNFCCC COP, is that really we need a different funding structure, that we need and ensure long-term, and we are thinking here really about 10 plus years, donor funding for science-based implementation of EBA from the assessment of the challenge to the post-project evaluation, that we ensure that the whole cycle of do I implement the measure in relation to a challenge and what is the goal setting, that this is something which is really the time that is needed to ensure that, and also important for the donor side, that they can, that this effectiveness and that this effectiveness is really some part of this evaluation. A third point is to ensure that a key, ensure that a key set of indicators are inherent in the monitoring and evaluation scheme from short-term to long-term, relevant for local, national and global scale, and considerate of social, ecological and economic aspects. In our discussion, we were thinking about boxes, to formulate boxes of fruit where we put apples and bananas, whether it's what is important for whom, whether it's the apples or the bananas, just speaking in these terms, but the idea of having kind of safeguards, looking at social benefits, economic benefits, but for sure also ecological benefits, relevant for people that they can attach to it, but also something comparable at national or international scale. That's and what we were also thinking, that these indicators, we can, for example, provide a guidance of indicators in relation to these key boxes, but that they are overall framed as a relation of the goal to a challenge set. For example, what is the reduction, how can we measure the reduction of vulnerability in relation to climate challenge to be addressed? That this is kind of how you pick indicators in order to address something like this in the this specifically. And the fourth point in terms of a key message is to promote learning networks among practitioners during the EBA implementation. We have a lot of a brain drain in terms of going to having projects, and then people go off and disperse. And I think this is something to more institutionalize. And we had one comment also in this relation, in this regard, to specify also, how to say, the coherence aspect in terms of the monitoring and evaluation, that this is something obvious because we do some joint monitoring across different topics and aspects in the EBA context. I stop here and wait for your questions, for your challenging questions.
Great, thank you. So thank you to Group 3. Maybe because, Group 4 rather, maybe because you're already thinking about it, I feel like you've explained a lot of the questions that I would have had. And maybe it's because you're an M&E focus group, then you're also thinking about this. I think the only thing I want to say, which would have been a question, but we don't really have an answer to, is thinking about the indicators for adaptation. We do not have indicators for adaptation, right? We have proxy indicators a lot of the times. So maybe my challenge, maybe not for this session, is what are those indicators, right? If we're going to have boxes, what are examples of those indicators?
I'd like to take one thing that I find is very important, and it links to finance. If we have, and sorry, I'm often talking more from the perspective of the national governments, having national governments that track their own funding towards adaptation is really a good start. This is just from a funding point of view. Of course, we have more like hectares and we have people benefiting, but the nitty-gritty details are in the verification and in the methodology, and I'm not going to go in here now.
But that's a good example, I think. Spending for adaptation could be one example. Go ahead.
No, I think it's also important to have in mind that I think it's good to have not a clear indicator in that sense, but to have also indicators of change, you know, in terms of transformative indicators, how Because if we have fixed indicators, we will have this as our. We cannot change the curve if something is going in the wrong direction, for example. I think it's important to keep this also flexible and rather talk about adaptive indicators in that sense, because adaptation is a moving target, as we started the day off today. And I think climate change is also something which is, we have projections which can help us for orientation in terms of what is the future scenario we want to adapt to. But also this is a moving target, and I think it's important to have indicators that flexible that we can also go with a changing situation and not move towards hotter temperatures when we have, I don't know, whatever turns the curve, you know? So I think.
All right. Thank you very much. Can we continue in the reception?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. Just because we're over time and we still have one more group. All right. Thank you so much to group 4. All right. Rohini? Yes. Selfishly, I put you in group 3 because I know the discussions that we've had. So my challenge to you is also to link with the examples that have already been shared.
Just also let me introduce myself because I just came for this segment. I'm from UNDP. I work on nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans, and I'm deliberately spelling those out and not using the abbreviations. And I'm also in that expert group for the indicators. We're really looking forward. I'm not on the ecosystems group, but the ecosystems group is identifying indicators. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. So our group had, I think, really different experiences, but a lot of unifying things that came out of it. We had experiences from Philippines, from Fiji, from Guatemala, and also from the Global EbA Fund, and from Germany. And so I think, so we are about bridging policy and practice. So there was, I think, we kind of started out with the, so I just want to give a flavor of the discussion and then maybe to go into some of the recommendations that came out. So I think one of the sort of things that we took up right in the beginning, or at least I took up, was that EBA receives less than 2% of climate finance, so it's very underfunded. Also, it's one of the hottest areas of requests for support for NDCs to kind of enhance the NDCs with EBA, and also. Kind of a large proportion of adaptation plans do include EBA measures, but somehow the potential is not fully realized, and I think that conversation is probably happening throughout the day. So what I think what we started discussing, what is this gap between the policy and the practice? And I think we were really looking at, because there were a lot of local on-the-ground experiences from our group, and some of the sort of issues that came up were that there are actually sometimes too many plans. It's really hard to kind of keep track for policymakers, but also for non-policymakers. There are national plans, local plans, there are national biodiversity plans, national adaptation plans. It's really hard to keep track. And it's sort of important to really identify some areas of maybe, potential to really optimize resources, across all of these, and it might be, in the selection of the EBA interventions, and they're sort of, and all these plans provide the basis for that, but they're really hard to follow. Also, when it comes to actually trying to practically unpack a priority from one of those plans into, something that can be funded on the ground, there's just way too much intellectualization, too much of checklists, very long processes, a lot of administration, which are all barriers for progress. And if you actually want to invest in or develop an intervention, it's even hard to know what is the channel, how do you actually reach a policy maker? Or who do you talk to? Or is there even a center or a help desk or a place where you can get information? And this is something that everyone sort of resonated with. There's also, I think, we actually went through we went through quite a lot of barriers, but then we also found that there were quite a few solutions. And they were actually, I think the main question the group tried to answer is, how do we proceed at scale with EBA? And, how do we sort of, get out of this sort of a niche kind of an area? So actually some of the sort of ideas that came up were that, I'm going to skip some of the barriers. There were actually a lot of barriers which were being discussed. But so one of the things sort of that came up is that, if you're talking to a policymaker or a minister or the COP president or whoever it is, the EBA needs to really demonstrate benefits, in a very tangible way. And also needs to show a lot of, it needs to show evidence of these benefits. And also, there are, there needs to be a kind of a community of champions, because there's a lot of advocacy required, and there have to be sort of people championing EBA also at different levels. And because most of the adaptation interventions, including EBA, are kind of long-term interventions, even nurturing leadership it's important to nurture either shared leadership or long-term leadership, because the programs are happening and then they end and then there isn't much continuity. And it's also important to avoid this exclusivity. Like, there are some people who work on EBA, and then there are others who maybe don't want to work on EBA, and you have to sort of take them along. And this is a bit of a longer term process. So that's so that the issue of inclusion is important, and especially talking to your enemies on this part. And I mean, there was actually very positive sort of feedback on some of the experiences of working with the private sector, as long as the interests can be aligned. There were cases where the interests can be aligned, and you should work on with those ones. There are some cases where interests are not aligned, and now we were trying to be very positive, so we didn't really go too much into that part. There's also the generally issue of terminology and language, accessibility. All of these are kind of critical to really, I think it comes back to just avoid intellectualizing it, use use easier language so that people can understand, and always, speak with examples. And our group, we had almost a 1.5 hour conversation full of examples, which we can't really go into now. But so there were examples where there can be a shared language, and when benefits are being shown to people. Also, I think, I think that's already more than 2 or 3.
I think we're at 5.
But
we're at 5.
I'm going to try to make sure that you don't ask me any questions. So you're getting all the answers.
Don't worry. You won't be able to anticipate it. That's okay.
No, and I think generally the economic case for EBA, that's really important to make. So some of these are a little bit like kind of longer term sort of recommendations. And really all apologies, because we spoke a lot in this group. So I hope I kind of try to summarize what I could. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately for this group, I do know where the discussion was. So this is also for you all to check me if there's something that needs additional questions. But I do have a question for you. When we're talking about inclusion of people, perhaps could you give an example of what that discussion was and what that looks like in terms of working with the people that we want to work with and then the people that we don't want to work with?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take an example from the group. I think it was our friend from Guatemala who gave an example there where they were working with a bunch of cattle ranchers, and and also including a lot of sort of, local people in that conversation. And obviously, some of the interventions require kind of a diversification so that, you're not just sort of having this big piece of land which is completely denuded of, any kind of sort of vegetation or whatever. So there were diversified, actions being taken to use the land differently, to conserve soil, etc. But obviously, these things have trade-offs and they have benefits. So by taking the sort of a bigger group around the table and working through the interventions, they started seeing benefits. So, you could sort of minimize maybe some of the issues that would have come up. I think we actually had an example from the Philippines as well. I'm looking as to whether, in fact, is there anyone from the group that would like to share that? Because they were really on-the-ground examples. on inclusion. I mean, I remember from Germany you were mentioning let's not be exclusive. Do you want to maybe say something about that in terms of inclusion?
Well, put it this way, if you want to reach a goal, you always have to listen to the ones who you would like, because they might have very good ideas, get into contact, and reach your goal, basically, because if you don't, nothing will happen.
Thank you. And I think the elephant in the room is kind of what's happening in the US right now with funding towards environmental action, right? Is it that all that work stops for the next 4, maybe 8 years, or do you find a way to speak to stakeholders? So we talked about stakeholder analysis graph, right? You have people with interest and impact, and sometimes it's low interest, negative impact, but that's still a key stakeholder. How do you bring them into the discussion? Right?
Yeah.
Don't have any answers.
Yeah. But there's something, I think, the thing that really came out from the discussion was there are actually more experiences on the ground and less reflection of those priorities in these policy instruments. So in some cases in other cases you have abstract sort of priorities which then need to be translated to the ground in a very top-down way. I think this is an example where actually there's a lot more experience on the ground which needs to be able to go back into these policy instruments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rohini, and thank you to the members of Group 3. But also thank you again to our facilitators, Tristan, Jeffrey, Anna, Rohini, Yvonne, and Astrid. Really appreciate you taking your time with us today. I will close. I wanted to come up with a summary of the different actions, but I have written a lot, and I know there will be documentation shared at the end. So we'll put all of this down on paper in a way that is coherent, and then we can see how to take it forward. So thank you all so much. Ali?
Thank you, Wendy, and everyone. My job was to, summarize the whole day, but as we are out of time, so that's quite easy now. I'll just do in 1 minute. Overall, thank you for being with us and reflecting together. Because, in this social media, era, it's very difficult for us to, pay attention to write big reports. What we are discussing, is already there in many cases, and some are new aspects. So how best to take it forward, and that's where what we will try. And again, there are very good examples. CBD representative Tristan being here full day. Thank you for that. So those are the policy arena where we can inform, influence, being part of that. Similarly, UNFCCC was there. Many other, all people who are taking action on ground and working at policy level, research level, other institutions. So that's how we will learn from each other. As I said in the morning, climate change is a totally different narrative. At times, perhaps we try to tackle it like any other project. If I just talk about projects for the moment, this is, the group who was talking about monitoring, so right, that maybe we need to be so going wrong in many indicators and other things because we want to develop those when we are developing the proposal, And as I said in the morning, by the time you get funded, problem has changed on ground. In many cases, I know there are droughts and other things in those areas, and we have very fixed solutions, which we want to take those. Do we need to change? How to change it? And it's not easy. At times, there are requirements which need to be fulfilled, and donors themselves can't change it because that's a given, aspects where you can't change things. So how to be adaptive, adaptive, not to reinvent square wheels, as I again said in the morning. So those are the things we need to only learn by being together. So it's great that, this 11th EBA Knowledge Day, and we will work with you to take things forward. As happened previously, we converted all these into technical briefs, knowledge briefs, and those were informing, influencing policies. And also, as in the morning, we were sharing, and then Wendy also shared that there are many pieces of this knowledge did inform donors and other how to have integrated approaches. Because EBA, end of the day, is so, theoretically, I'll say, is so good. It's perfect in a way. It talks about not only ecological development, but social, inclusive, but also economic development. Unless and until these three pillars of EBA, ecological, social, and economic, these three are not addressed concurrently, things will be, half-baked sort of solutions. And that's the challenge, because most of us coming from conservation sector, or social development sector, or some economics. So partnerships are the key, because one organization cannot address all those. They don't have the mandate. So having, those partnerships which are diverse in nature, with diverse expertise, that's critical. And then again, what we learned during this, again, I'm repeating some of the things which I don't want to, but still, duration of the initiatives and projects, that's again critical. We need to go beyond these, small boutique projects. We need to go into programmatic approaches. And only programmatic approaches then will be applied, because then there will be return on investment. Whatever we do, why finance ministries, we can bring them and they will be just there to either give an endorsement letter or other. But at national level, finance, planning commissions, and commerce ministries and other, they usually don't part of it, or wherever they are, they're not equal partners. There could be exceptions, that proves the rule, but overall, these are the challenges. We need to move forward. And once we have these things, only then I think we will have integrated approaches and demonstrating in a changing environment. Whole narrative, we are back to square. 30, 40 years of all the wins that conservation leads to development and development conservation. In many countries, that's not the case. If we look into that, things are moving, there are security issues, cut back of. So whatever is left, we need to demonstrate that effective implementation is critical. Again, when I go into these, and many of you must have evaluated many projects, we are not at the desired level of outcome because of so many things which are beyond our control. How to work towards those things which are not under control. Many of you pointed out those things. How to make those part of the project proposals and implementation and then going. So all these challenges, if we can take those forward, things would improve. Because again, there is no other, thing. We need to improve. Overall adaptation sector, as Rohini also shared that 2% is going into this integrated approach. Again, I'm not fixated on EBA, another just integrated approach. Biodiversity, climate smart, development narrative needs to be there. Unless and until poverty is, addressed in developing countries, we cannot talk about conservation. Then conservation is directly linked with local economic development. And many a time, local economic development is not climate smart. So it's a vicious circle where we are operating, and adaptation does not happen in a vacuum. We need to have bases. So let's try to keep challenging ourselves, keep reflecting, and keep changing. Because world is changing. If we remain static, static waters start smelling. So let's, try to change. Only then things will change. Thank you very much. Please get in touch if you want to continue on this. As earlier said, there are working groups which we shared. You want to set up new working groups in areas, we will facilitate that. That's what our mandate is. As I said, over 120 organizations, donors, UN agencies, academia, INGOs, NGOs, now CBOs also becoming part of it. So we are all have access to those. States are also there, and IUCN, is the only organization when states and INGOs and community-based organizations, and now our next other IPs also, indigenous people organizations are also member. So we can provide all holistic views where we can access those things. So we are ready to facilitate that process. So if you want to set up a working group or something else, please do contact us. We will take that forward. So with that, I'll stop and thank you all, and also the team who did this. One of our member, Rose, who is on maternity leave from last week, so she's not here. But thank you, everyone. And now we will go for networking and refreshment and cocktail, or just drinks maybe, I don't know. Those are downstairs where we had the lunch, just to the right of where we were sitting. So thank you again.